Welcome everybody back to my channel. My name is Nydia. I do the Curated shelf, and yes, this week's topic is going to be speed reading. So if you're interested, if you want to know more about my thoughts on it, please stay tuned. So now for the official intro. I'm Nydia B. I do the Curated shelf. It's a weekly vlog where I'm basically going to be looking at kind of like the books that have really helped shape my ideas, my thinking. I go into fictional and non-fictional literature. For the first part of this channel, I've been looking at spiritual and self-help books. That will obviously evolve over time. I also will be concentrating on topics that interest me. And speed reading is this week's topic. So please stay tuned if you're interested. Obviously, always like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel. And so yeah, let's get into the topic. So this week, there was another vlogger who brought up this topic and their thoughts on it, and it got me really kind of like, also it was like a hook. As soon as they started talking about it, I really kind of like was also taken aback by it, and it kind of like has been in my mind for the last few days since he did that vlog, that what is it about speed reading that kind of like has caught my attention. And then it made me think of my own journey in reading and falling in love with reading as a child, but how that developed over time. And something that I've seen as a booktuber and calling this channel the Curated Shelf is that increasingly I'm becoming really I'm becoming very picky and meticulous in what I pick or to put on my shelf, to put into my mind. And it's the same way as today we see a lot of people talking about the curated closets, talking about the clothes that we wear, whether or not they're fast fashion, whether or not they're ethically produced and so forth, how much wear they get out of those clothes, and not revolving clothing so quickly. And a little bit of the curated shelf is born from that as well, that for me it's becoming more and more important that am I just buying books and buying items just to consume, or am I really kind of like consuming them, taking them in and absorbing what's written. And the last 10-15 years of my life has really become more about reading, which is more kind of like filtered and targeted. So what do I think of speed reading, and why has it been on my mind since I heard this other person's vlog? So first of all, I found out that there's two forms of speed reading. One is skimming, which is the one that I'm really familiar with, where basically, you know, and it's very common, especially as students, we go through a text and we're kind of like trying to pick out the key words and understand what the paragraph is about before we move on, and is very common in many different areas of work and studying. And I think a lot of people use that technique, and I understand it, and I get why we sometimes do need to do that. And I think it's particularly important, especially if we're going through large amounts of text and we just need to get through bulk. I think it's a key item to actually have, and key technique, sorry, to have handy. So there's skim reading, and the other one that I picked up on was what I understand it's called meta guiding. It's when we actually get a pen and we go through a book and line by line, kind of like we just skim the surface of it again, but this time using a pen, and we're just getting kind of like an idea of what the text is about again before moving on. And this, I kind of like, when I started thinking about speed reading, it also made me think of some of the booktube channels that I've seen online, and kind of like why I am also myself kind of like doing booktube, but for me from an angle of kind of like really being more careful about what I choose to read. And the reason why I say that is because I saw some booktube channels, and it was kind of like overwhelming, where there are times where people love to buy 10-15 books in a week, and then these large to be read lists and so forth, and it kind of like felt overwhelming for me. And I remember when I was beginning the Curated Shelf, all I could think was I'm not sure if I'm going to be going through like 10 books in a week, and that's when it got me thinking like, but then what do I read, and why is it important for me to read it? And that's where the idea of this channel came from. So going back to the fact that, you know, there were 10-15 books that the person might be going through, or I don't know how fast they read, I then came across skim reading, speed reading, and I started to look up what it was, and then I saw YouTube channels and how to speed read. And one of the techniques I saw was when somebody would take a book and they would literally draw 2 lines along the middle of the page. So I can show you here using this book here. What they would do is they would, for example, take a page like this. And I'm not going to mark the book myself, but they would literally draw 2 lines into the page and then just read the middle of the page. And the idea was to cut out the words at the side. And this got me intrigued, as in, why would we do this, and what's the point of this? And of course, it's to do with the absorption of the book and absorption as fast as possible. But I kind of like was miffed, to be quite honest with you. That's a word that comes to mind. I was miffed at why I would do this. And then it got me thinking, then why is it that I read at the pace that I do read? And so then I kind of like found out that there are 3 different types of reading methods. One is subvocation, where basically we read, but we're saying out loud in our minds, so thinking out loud in our minds, the words as we go over a page. The other one is auditory reading, where we actually say out loud the words, so somebody else can hear us as we read. And the last one is visual reading, where we understand the meaning of the word. And that is apparently, as we go from subvocalization to auditory reading to visual reading, they actually get faster. So subvocalization, which is the one that I use, where actually in my mind I'm saying out loud the word, is the slowest. Then comes auditory reading, which is actually faster, and visual reading being the fastest. And that's just to understand the meaning of the word, but it's not even saying out loud in our minds or physically the actual word, which I found very interesting. So it got me thinking about why I continue to read at a much slower pace, and would I want to do speed reading. So in the past, definitely I've done skimming. That's part of my student life, part of my working life as well. We've all done it, I think, many of us, especially for those of us who need to get through large amounts of text for certain purposes. But would I do kind of like skimming or speed reading for the books that I love and enjoy? And I've just picked up this book by Philippa Gregory called The Constant Princess, a historical fiction book. Or would it be one of the self-help books that I've talked about so much over in the past videos, with Byron Katie or with Marianne Williamson, or one of those? Would I do speed reading over those? And it got me thinking, for fiction or for non-fiction, for me, I really need to do that slower paced reading. And there are several reasons for it, which I'm going to go through. One is that as much as I love to read, I also love to write. And writing is a form and a creativity in itself, fiction or non-fiction. And I believe that one of the things that helps me to be a writer is to be able to read and absorb any other text as well. It's almost like a symbiotic relationship. So being a writer, I really do need to feel that when I read a book, I'm absorbing it. And part of that is for me to really understand the depth of what the author wants me to understand. So especially when it comes to fiction books, as I read a text, for me, I have an imagination that goes and makes the scene. For example, if a woman is wearing a blue dress and she walks into a restaurant, my imagination fires up into different forms of blue dresses, different kinds of restaurants. Is the restaurant well lit? Is it dark? Is it round tables? Is it one of those coffee houses? Is it a bar style restaurant? So my imagination just fires up, and the author usually for me fills in some details, but not all of them. And part of that is because I'm bonding with the book. And so as my imagination fires up, I'm left with something that I really take away from that scene. The other part of it is that books usually for me evoke memories. So as I read the text, I'm using my own memory recall to fill in the blanks. But at the same time, as I read the book, memories are forming around in my everyday life as I read the book. The way I first hear a piece of music and it's from a certain period of my life, it always reminds me of that period of my life. And for me, books do the same thing. So for example, some of the books that I have, you can see literature here, that's Agatha Christie. That's from my teens. And whenever I see Agatha Christie, it always reminds me also of my teens and some of the feelings that those books evoked from that time. My aunt, one of my aunts, is also a huge Agatha Christie fan, so she lent me a lot of her books when I was younger, and it's a bonding relationship. And when I'm speed reading, I'm not sure if I would have that bond with a book. So that's the first aspect, which is to do with bonding, and it's to do with memory recall, and it's to do with allowing my imagination to be fired up. The second thing is that for me, different authors are teaching me again and again more about, I read in English mostly, they're teaching me more and more about the English language, and that is a really key part of reading for me. So am I reading a British author from the 1940s or the 1950s? Am I reading an author from the US from the 1930s and the 1940s, such as John Steinbeck and The Grapes of Wrath? Am I reading an author from the 1970s, 1980s, from the subcontinent of India, from perhaps a country in the African continent? And because there are these variations, or even Australian authors, so it should really be more global, but as there are these variations of authors in the English language, and also translations into the English language of books that were written in another language, it always enriches my vocabulary. And so if I'm skimming, I just don't have that chance for me to understand that grammatical structure of a sentence. And it might seem kind of like very over the top, but that really is important for me, to understand the accent, to understand that how it's being read out loud in my mind, that this is the connotation behind it. And yeah, and that's a really important part of it for me, to absorb the grammatical structure of the wording. And so it just baffles me when I think of skim reading, because I think, well, I might miss all of that. And then lastly, I just said that word connotation. I just want to bring up that for me, when I read a book, there's a lot of connotations to do with a word. So again, the word blue and blue dress. Am I thinking sky blue? Am I thinking of air? Am I thinking of deep oceans? Am I thinking of midnight blue? And so just the word blue in itself has so many different connotations that is also part of my reading processes. And believe it or not, it's an actual internal bonding that happens now, because then when I discuss that book with a friend, whether it's book club or, some kind of event I go to, it's really interesting how several people can read the same book but have different ideas about it, because their own connotations are being fired up, their own thinking around words are being fired up. And I think that's part of the enrichedness that I get from a book. So yeah, I've kind of like talked for a little bit of time about this topic. I think I could say a lot more, but these are my thoughts around speed reading, and why for me, perhaps I'm going to call it slow reading, which I guess would make some people kind of like raise eyebrows, but the way we have slow fashion and we have fast fashion, I'm going to call it slow reading. And I think it's really important for me to talk about that and why I embrace it. And if you have any thoughts on this subject, please leave your comments below. It's good to be back from a break. I took a little break in August, so it's good to see you all. Please do share this video with anyone else who you think it might be useful for. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.